Welcome to Rooted to Thrive, conversations to elevate our humanity. I'm your host, Rochelle Peterson Ansari, Professor P for short. This is your podcast sanctuary for cultivating mindsets and skills to elevate our shared humanity. We're taking a deep dive into practical strategies to evolve as anti-racist, culturally competent, and inclusive individuals and leaders. In each episode, we're bringing you real-world examples and actionable takeaways. We're going to talk about personal growth, fostering connection, and creating positive change that dismantles systemic barriers and creates environments where all of us are valued, empowered, and activate our collective power. This is Rooted to Thrive. Hi there. Welcome and welcome back to everyone joining us on Rooted to Thrive, Conversations to Elevate Our Humanity podcast, where we're discussing practical ways to become more open and receptive to human diversity in our personal lives, at work, and in learning environments. I'm your host, Rochelle Peterson Ansari, aka Professor P. Today, I am excited. I am thrilled that we have Dr. Pamela Barnett, and I'll be calling her Pamela throughout the episode. She's the Dean of the School of Arts and Communication at the College of New Jersey. Now, this is her third post as a dean. She's been a professor of English and African American Studies. She's led multiple university teaching and learning centers and other strategic initiatives. And she's the author of Dangerous Desire, Literature of Sexual Freedom and Sexual Violence Since the 60s. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm intrigued by that title. Now, Pamela and we connected so many years ago. And we were in communities where we were learning to be transformational leaders and to facilitate transformational intergroup dialogues. And since then, we've facilitated diversity-related trainings together, and we even worked together at LaSalle University. So, Pamela, I am honored to have you joining me today. How are you doing?
I am great. And thank you for inviting me. And I love kind of hearing you rehearse some history. We have known each other a long time. So
yes,
it's great to work on this together.
It has been a long time. So I'm excited. I guess it hasn't been yet 20 years, but close to that.
Right?
Yes, we've been around the block.
And you look exactly the same. Isn't that amazing?
Yes, you too. So today's topic is bridging divides through leadership and the arts. I can't wait to jump into this topic because you're going to be talking about turning to the arts to connect people across difference and also facilitating conflict, not violence, in classrooms and organizations. So I'm excited to get started. I would like you to tell us how bridging these divides through leadership in the arts helps us elevate our humanity.
By the way, I just love the title of this podcast, Elevating Our Humanity. And it really is, in the end, I think the goal of like my life's work, right? As a leader and someone who works in the arts. So I'm right now the dean for a School of the Arts and Communication, and we have disciplines, art, design, music, communication, journalism. And sometimes people tell the story, like all of these disciplines fit together, and this school fits together because we're the school of creativity. And that is true. But you're also the school of connections, right? That to do any of this work, yes, you need to learn how to express yourself in all of these different ways, whether it's music, design, writing. But you also were teaching people how to really engage and attend closely to the expression of others, right? So people who are making music and design and telling stories and investigative journalism, right? Like all of these fields, if we're going to do them right, they teach you not just to express, but how to listen. But I like that term. I think I might start using it. It elevates your humanity because you are really getting in touch with something in yourself, but also beyond yourself.
Yes. In yourself and beyond yourself. I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. So, oh, thank you. So that is a great introduction. Now, I would love to for you to share just a little bit about your background
Mm.
and how you became involved in this work, right? It may not be your professional, from a professional standpoint, it may be personal or both.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to say the professional forced me to get personal. So
Oh,
I got a PhD in English and I was looking for a job in 20th century American literature. I had written a dissertation that looked at, um, literature that represented rape and sexual violence, a 20th century American literature, and a lot of those texts did deal with racial issues. But when I was applying for jobs, I was just looking for that straight 20th century American lit job.
mhm.
And I think it's the hand of God, the hand of the universe. I ended up applying for a job that I got rejected from at University of South Carolina, the first time. Um, oh no, wait, the other way around. I didn't apply because I thought I'd be rejected.
Oh,
So
okay.
they had two searches. I know this is getting a little involved, but they had one in 20th century American literature, one in African American studies slash Southern literature. And I hadn't applied for that African American studies position as a white woman. And they ended up calling me and saying, "Why didn't you apply?" And I said, "Well, because I'm a white woman and I can imagine you really want to have a more diverse faculty. And this is a place where you do." And they're like, "Just come on down to South Carolina and interview for this job and let's see if it's a fit." Um,
Mhm.
so it really starts there with a job that I did not apply for, but that I ended up. It's where I started my career at University of South Carolina. I was there until tenure, and it I started to think seriously about teaching, about inclusion, about how I had a responsibility to do anti-racist work because this stuff isn't going to get solved, right?
Mhm.
Unless everyone takes responsibility for it and where they stand. I got to Temple. I connected pretty quickly with colleagues in I don't remember what it was called then, but it was Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Leadership Office,
Yeah,
including the Ched Dorman, who was a dear friend to both of us, Dr. Ched Dorman, and Tiff Archie. And but right from the beginning, we were working together.
right.
And Ched had this opportunity to learn about more diversity facilitation. And he brought this French psychologist who works on conflict resolution and bringing diverse groups together to Temple for a 12 credit certificate. Now, when he said, "I want you to come like for these long weekends and earn a 12 credit certificate," I'm like, "I don't want to do this," but he's my friend. I will show up for the first. I'm not going to do all 12 credits, but I'll do the first three. And it changed my life. Because Dr. Charles Rajman, the guest, professor, he works with Hutus and Tutsis, assassins, survivors. They got to live together in
Mhm.
their villages in Rwanda and solve the problems that beset their communities. Education, clean water, right?
Mhm.
So that was a really important thing. And in order learning from Charles Rajman means learning about yourself because he
Yes.
really forces you to think very hard about what are your own fears, what are your biases, where's your ugliness and your shadow, um, where can you make common cause, how can you harmonize your motivations, and he taught me some strategies that I think I grew as a person, but he's taught me strategies that have served me as I've taught more inclusive classrooms, as I've done facilitations like some of the ones that you and I have done together,
Mhm.
and then as a leader, because learning how to sort of make this diverse group of people work well together is, some of those strategies apply
Yes, they
in
do.
day-to-day life.
Well, some, shoot, all I
Yeah.
would say all of them. And I did not get the opportunity to work with Charles Rodgman until you brought him to LaSalle University.
Yeah.
And again, I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that. It actually it felt like something like that was a little out there for me. I was like,
Mhm.
what is this? What was it called? Transformational social therapy.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
was like, the word therapy and
Yes.
sitting
I
in
can
the
see
group with people.
that. So
I
you
was
did it for me, sort of like I did it for Chad. Like I'll show up at this thing.
no, I didn't. I didn't show up. So, and I was outside of the community, so I would have, I believe, had to pay to participate in
Oh,
that.
okay.
And I was like,
Mm,
when I did participate, and that was 2019, so many years later, when I did participate, it was kind of after I had the experience with Ched, people like Ched and Hillary, Ched Dorman and Hillary Blecker leading the transformational intergroup dialogue, which they developed with many of the principles and the frameworks that were learned through Charles Rajman's work,
hmm
right?
hmm
And then I was like, okay, now I'm becoming a believer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No, I knew
So,
you showed up in 2019. That's what I
yeah,
was talking
right.
about.
And
You made
then,
your way there.
but not when he was at Temple.
Right. I remember that. Yeah.
So, but I was a believer, like I was interested when the opportunity came. And, I've been doing this introspective work for many years. I too believe that the work that we do on ourselves is the most important work, and that it helps us to bridge those divides when we see how we operate in the ways that we generally judge and criticize other people.
Hmm
And I just wanted to share a little bit about that. You just brought that up for me. I didn't know that was going to be a part of this discussion today, but it was a powerful experience when I this was just a weekend, right?
Right.
So maybe, I don't know, 10 hours at the most.
Probably.
Um,
Yeah.
I grew, right? So, many times we get on these platforms, these podcasts to talk about being experts. But I also believe in being vulnerable
hmm
and
hmm
helping people understand that, we're all experts in something, but
hmm
but you're the thing that you're most expert in is being yourself. And sometimes we need an outside influence to help us see. So just a few exercises I think we did on the first day, right? This is not a promo for Charles Rogers, but just the exercises we did on the first day helped me bring something up for me, right? So essentially, Charles Rosman would say, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have more experience with him.
Yeah.
He would say that some of the social violences, and I'm going to ask you to define that for us in
hmm
a few
hmm
minutes. Um, some of the social violences that we've experienced, if we don't process them and work through them, we are potentially going to replicate them.
Yes. Yes.
And in that experience, right, he had you go through these exercises. We were pretty much talking about what our parents did and how we responded, when we got, when how they responded when we got in trouble, etc. There was
hmm
a lot more to it. And I remember, and I'm not, I think this was the first time I had brought these experiences up again. That, yeah, I the social violence that I experienced most that I could recall in that situation during that weekend was humiliation.
hmm hmm
And so, because I could recount things like when I got in trouble, my mom would call my aunt and my grandma and tell on me, you know, and in their eyes, I was like the golden child, at least the way they talked to me, right? Like I was the first grandchild for my grandmother.
hmm
And even for my aunt, right? She hadn't had children yet. And this was my mother's brother's wife. And
hmm
so she would always tell on me. And I just thought that was the worst thing in the world. But another piece to that was I could see some things that she did wrong as an adult, right? What the adults were doing wrong in the house. And I was
Right.
like, I don't get to tell.
Uh-huh.
Right. And so I think that's where the humiliation kind of carried with me. And it
Mhm.
actually made me think about how I was responding in the present day to certain behaviors that I was experiencing. Right. And I was going through an experience at that time, professionally, where someone was being humiliating.
Mhm.
Right. Like, or,
And it really triggers you if that's your
and it
core wound, right?
Yes, yes. And it was interesting because I actually made a different choice after that experience, right? Like instead of going to, HR on the person, I chose to sit with it a little longer because if that was there for my growth, I was going to get beyond it.
Right, right. That's so deep.
Yeah.
I mean, that's central to his teaching, and I talk about it.
Mhm.
Actually, that's that difference between what Charles defines as conflict versus violence is so central to just the way I do my work, try to live my life.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
he's like, conflict is a good thing, right? That, or it can be, right? Where
Okay.
you see something different than I see something, like when we bring these diverse perspectives, maybe we bump up against each other because like I know what it's like to be a rural person who really needs my gun for hunting and is all about the NRA, or I'm a person who grew up in a neighborhood where gun violence, hurt my community, you know, and maybe if we talk to each other, we'll be able to see each other's common humanity, even if we end up really disagreeing about gun policy. But
Right.
so that conflict, like where we fight it out, it's good and probably important for a democracy, or is
Yeah.
important for a democracy. But then there's just the violence that we do to each other. And, you know, it does in a way like originate in the family. Like I think that's where the therapy part is,
Right.
right? Which,
Hmm.
but Charles, like, if we're really going to be more like healers and people who work in this field of anti-racism and inclusion, you have to deal with some of the original traumas and violences, but then it really is linked to sort of broader social violences that we do to each other. So he has he defines four kinds of violence that maybe we all fear
Hmm.
and that we all have the capacity to do to each other, that we do to each other, right?
Hmm.
So one is attack. We
Hmm.
fear being physically or verbally attacked, name calling, insults. We fear being humiliated, shamed.
Hmm.
We fear being guilted, kind of
Yeah.
blame. It's
Yes.
all on you. Blaming
Hmm.
you for this mess. The fourth, which I think is so interesting, is abandonment. We fear being abandoned, dismissed, like there is nothing you have to say that I want to hear, right? And Charles says that all four of those violence, attack, shame, guilt, abandonment, are on a continuum of dehumanization, right?
Yes.
So they really are violent. And kind of figuring out what's the one that was done to you. And I would say mine is also shame, humiliation. I was so criticized as a kid, right? For just being my nerdy self. And I did use some of the transformational intergroup dialogue methods by first sort of, can we define what some of our fears are about? Let's assume that we got some staunch conservatives in this room and some staunch liberals in this room. Let's assume it's
Mhm.
50-50. I don't think it was, but let's assume that. Like,
Mhm.
what would your fears be about talking in this context? And it all came up, and I was able to say, see, you feel being insulted, attacked. You fear being shamed, like you're so stupid, how could you think that, right? Or you fear being abandoned, like, I can't even talk to you libtards, right? Like there's all this stuff that
Mhm.
can happen. And to be able to share that framework with them and sort of say, so one, be cognizant of and recognize when a violence is done to you, because
Mhm.
maybe you speak up for yourself, protect yourself, but also put yourself to the test.
So I have this person coming to me with, whatever they say to me. And on the surface, the comment is not humiliation. right? But it's kind of like, calling me to the carpet, on something. My gut reaction is, I'm going to show you.
Yeah, I'll get there first.
Yes, so like I'm going to show you,
Right.
like really how violent you're being. But I
Hmm.
was meeting it with violence,
Right. And
right?
listen, I
Very
mean,
calmly.
vengeance, it's like the oldest thing in the book, right? Like,
Look,
some of the first literature, Beowulf, it's all about vengeance. Like it's a
yeah,
common, I mean, it's in us,
right.
but do we elevate our humanity and
That's
learn
right.
how? Mhm.
Yes. And unfortunately, because of our past experiences with violence, we might avoid, right? Just in the name of protecting ourselves.
Right. Right.
Instead of, if I were to love you and I want to stay in positive relationship with you, what do I do? Instead of asking myself that question, I might avoid. So
Mm.
one of the things that I often tell people in the trainings and other development activity that I lead is, in order to sustain positive relationship, we have to think about ways we can respond when our biases, for example, are confronted.
Mhm.
Yes, because they're going to be. Now, something came to mind when you were talking. I thought, because I'm thinking about how you said you have a framework for facilitating conflict, not violence. So
Mhm.
I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you facilitate conflict, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
when it's possible,
Okay.
um, sometimes it's like in a class, a controlled or, a workshop environment, facilitated.
Mhm.
Um, and when I say framework, some of it really is just that I guess I'm
That's
calling
fine.
it a framework of what are the four violences: the
Okay.
attack, the shame, the guilt, the humiliation.
So,
And I feel like when people like know that, they can start to recognize it when it's happening in a class or a workshop or a community, and we can call each other on it, or call ourselves on it.
mhm.
Um, but in terms of like how I facilitate, did you ask me like how I use it in my work as a leader?
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Facilitating conflict, not violence.
Yeah, no, it has to happen all the time. So
Mhm.
I will tell you, like when I know that I am about to have a meeting where people are going to be angry at each other or me, that there's something at stake. Like I really do, like I do like kind of a meditation and I tell myself, love everybody in the room. Right. And it's not always easy because I sometimes know where I stand and I wish those people would like stop because this is what needs to happen. But and I am not always successful. This sounds so good. Like I'm doing my best. But trying to come into the conflict with kind of that positive feeling of love and also that I need to try to understand where people are coming from.
Yes.
Right. So I will sometimes go into a space where there is conflict and and it happens more than you'd think over things that I wouldn't think would be sources of conflict, but they are within departments and and between faculty and administration. So I really do when I say facilitated, I think part of it is just allowing for the conflict, inviting people, not jumping all over them when they say something we don't like. I have shared with colleagues like this is my framework for violence. Let's not do these four things. I mean, I've just been explicit about it in certain cases. And if we see each other doing it, like, can we say stop?
Mhm.
I definitely had situations too where like the conflict is high enough to where I'm just like, we're gonna take a break.
Yeah. And do you find that that serves you well as a leader in terms of the people who are you're supporting, right? Like that they still work well with you afterwards, right? They demonstrate some level of trust in you.
I feel that way. It'd be interesting to get a
Mhm.
360 review and see what everyone thinks of me
Mhm.
as leader. But I will tell you this, like, I don't think anyone's afraid to tell me what they think. I think people know, like, no one's going to get punished for it. So people are willing to be in conflict with me, which to me seems like a level of trust.
Yes.
And at least right now, right here, I feel like we are working so well together. Like it's creative, it's generative, it's positive here at the College of New Jersey. And that doesn't mean there haven't been conflicts about like, is this major, you know, I'm telling you, you need to have higher enrollment.
Right.
What are you going to do about it? And it's not my fault. Like, how dare you like bring this up, Dean? But like we got to ask that question, but we get through it, right? We
Okay.
are able to talk. So I do feel like there's a level of trust. And maybe the main thing for me though is also just being understanding about how, yeah, people's vulnerability. Like sometimes when someone's really agitated, just trying to understand like what is it? Are they feeling misunderstood or shamed? Are they feeling
Mm,
like no one's listening to them and abandoning them? Just trying to keep that violence framework in mind. Like what is raising the stakes so much?
yes. And we know that in many college and university environments that can be considered the norm to actually do all of those things.
Yeah, well, probably a lot of environment,
And
but
a lot of
this is the
places,
one I
but we
know,
can talk
colleges and
right. We're
universities.
just talking about what we know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And yeah, that probably shows up in any industry, but it's something to really consider,
yeah.
right? In terms of elevating humanity, elevating our leadership.
Mhm.
I want to turn more specifically to looking at the arts to connect people across difference too, right? Because I really want you to talk more about that. What,
Yeah.
yeah. So, we want to always leave people with practical strategies to elevate their humanity. So, it's still very broad right now for me when I'm thinking about the
Mhm.
arts, right? Like, so what do you mean about about how we use the arts to connect people?
Right. So I sometimes I'm trying to think like, well, I kind of made that argument. I was with like a group recently and I made that argument like, well, the arts connect us. And someone's like, well, give me an example. And I was
Mhm,
like, how about you all give me an example? And it was just so beautiful. Like one person saying, I think about that time when I saw that photograph of a young woman in either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, or maybe it was a Vietnam War image. Actually, I think it was a Vietnam War image, but a young girl running naked down the street after being bombed with napalm. And he said, that he said it didn't exactly make him anti-war, like anti-Vietnam War, but it made him anti-war. Just like, oh my God, look at this, that he could see this child's humanity. And he was pretty young himself at the time. And
mhm,
someone else was talking about seeing the film Aaron Brockovich and how it really helped to
mhm,
understand this person who, because we're kind of working class,
mhm,
has the forces of, capitalism and, corporate power against her and the environment and her community, and how it really just made him think about something that he hadn't thought about before. I also I think it's beautiful when someone hears, the music or work of, let's say, a Black composer or a composer with a disability, or and
mhm.
hears the music and feels it all the way in their soul, right? I think your identity and your deepest self sometimes as an artist, and really sort of making visible something that maybe people wouldn't see
Yeah,
otherwise.
this is
Um, and that helps. Yeah, I think it builds your empathy, right? Your
yes.
ability to sort of be in someone else's shoes. I started in literature. I mean, I was an English professor in the beginning, English and African American studies. And I always felt like part of it is like, that is so deep. Like you're giving over your mind to someone else's
Mhm,
words, ideas, images, right? Like there's a way, like it's kind of happening in your own mind. Like I am reading Toni Morrison's Beloved, and
mhm,
I am reading, this enslaved woman's like trauma, right?
mhm,
And I'm reading about this enslaved woman whose child is dead. I mean, right?
mhm.
Like this whole, and it kind of takes up residence in you while you read that, right? It's not just something you're watching, like it's you're reading it, you're imagining it, it's in you. And to me, that's a deep connection, maybe with the character or the person who wrote that and shared it, right?
Yeah. Now, you just brought it up, you opened it up for me. So you talked about, sharing that experience. Like, I mean, can you share your personal experience with any piece of literature, that opened something up, made that connection deepen for you? Like something specific, like a moment you can remember, an awakening for you?
Yeah, that's good. Um, I don't know about an awakening, but well, I'll
Okay.
just come to the first thing that comes to mind. So when I
Okay.
was working on my dissertation, which was about representations of rape, I one of the texts that I wrote about was Gloria Naylor's The Women of Brewster Place. And one of the chapters, I think it might be one of the final ones, is about, the rape of a woman, a Black woman, lesbian woman. And it is so brutal. It is so brutal. And I think it's interesting. Like, I must have read that chapter, I mean, countless times. And there was
Hmm.
always this like little part of me that was kind of like, didn't want it to happen. Like, could there be a different ending?
Yeah.
Like that you start to get so connected. And like there was a reason I wrote my dissertation and eventually my book on this. That yeah, I think like I read some people's stories, heard stories that made me feel like that it was really important to look at this and elevate those voices and analyze some of those voices and what did they tell us about gendered violence and social violence. And but it really does start with a very human experience of, yeah, I just think empathy for the characters who experience these things and the writers who really have the guts
Yes.
to talk about sexual intimate violence.
Yes, I hear you. It's interesting. I recently wrote a book chapter, about becoming a culturally relevant and sustaining educator, a term we use in Pennsylvania, around our culturally responsive, relevant, and sustaining pedagogies and competencies. And I talked about how when I was in college, it was around my sophomore and maybe my junior year when I had my first African American women's right literature course. And that was the first time I was exposed to books that were written by African
Wow.
American women, about books that were about African American women.
Right.
And I saw myself in ways that I saw stories of other women that let me know I wasn't alone
Nice.
in
Nice.
some things that I didn't think I had permission to talk about.
Mm,
That's how deep it was. Talk about, sure, did it, I mean, it wasn't making me necessarily connect right across difference, yet it was, right? Like by
right.
then, I was in college in the 80s, Toni Morrison, I think, or had already, won, was a Pulitzer
Bill.
Prize?
Yeah,
The Nobel,
Nobel.
Nobel.
I don't know
You
what year, but
know,
yeah, I think you're right.
right. It was before that, right? So we were different by then, like in
Mhm.
some way. And a lot of people forget, where they came from.
Mhm. Mhm.
Some people forget that, and then a chasm gets created that wasn't there before, even, but you just talking about literature, that book, you just brought that up for me, that
I love knowing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that, there are some other kinds of, other benefits of getting, exposed to the arts, and especially hearing other stories. When you first started talking, I was thinking about, when you brought up Erin Brockovich and the photo, people's experiences with that. I remembered my experience, watching this movie, that was actually a documentary, and I think it was called Troubling the Waters. And it
Okay.
was a documentary made after Hurricane Katrina.
Mm,
Most of the footage was from someone who was in Hurricane Katrina. Like we had footage from her cell phone, when she was in the attic and the water was up to her face, right?
mm,
Here's the key. This person is someone who I think she said she was a drug dealer and started telling her story about, throughout this film, telling her story about how she had to steal to get food for her and her brother when she was younger because of their circumstances. They would have been put in foster care and separated, and she kind of just took on this adult role as a child to
mhm.
take care of a sibling. And that became normal for her, right? And so she became street identified,
Yeah,
and it softened my heart,
yeah,
right? It softened my heart because I had some very, strong judgment about people who stole and people who, dealt drugs.
right.
Very strong feelings about it, but it softened my heart to help me understand how some people could get in that situation.
That's right. Oh my
They
gosh.
didn't just pop out evil and, want to obliterate communities by selling drugs.
Next time someone asks me a question like that, I'm going to use your example because that's beautiful,
Mhm.
right? Like you had this idea of like, why would someone sell drugs? Well, just save your family, your
Mhm.
younger siblings who don't have care. I mean, that's
Mhm.
so deep. And I've
Yeah.
really been thinking about that a lot, and I'm willing to be political here. Um, that Donald Trump, the way he talks about immigrants,
Mhm.
like they are criminals, they're animals, they're horrible people. I mean, everyone's laughing about they eat cats and dogs, but like it's so extreme, like the hate and the violence. And I thought, I hope that most people listening to this have had some human experience with immigrant families and know better, right? And see their humanity. I just like that to me is probably one of the most violent things that's happening in our culture right
Yeah,
now.
the reality is that there are criminal people in every people group.
Yeah,
First of all, right? And 99% of the people who are immigrating here are not
of
the people,
course, right? And it's
right?
just it's such a brush and
Right.
yeah, I'm just really a believer in that if you can really hear someone's story, it's going to be a lot harder to hate them, you know?
Yes, when you
Sometimes
can
maybe you
really,
hear it because we're talking, but sometimes
yes,
you don't maybe have access to that
right.
person who crossed the border in Texas. So you got to read about it or
Yes,
experience it or see it in another way, maybe through an art, maybe through investigative journalism, but you
yes.
need
That's,
a way to get there.
that's what grieves my heart a lot, right? When people who are leaders or have a platform know, they know how people are going to respond to what they're saying, right? So for example, the people are playing on people's fear
Yes.
of people taking their jobs and people's fear of, any personal crime and saying, look, here's one or two people who did X, Y, and Z. Well, there are like 10 more in the people group living right here, in people groups that were born right here that look like the person who's scared,
Right. Right.
right? Or it's somebody in your family and you're ignoring it, right? Like
Right.
you ignore that it's a part of your life as well. I mean, some people, don't uh they don't put up blinders around their own life, but some people do.
Right.
When the COVID-19, right, was being linked to a people group, we see a rise
And
of people
violence.
being attacked.
Yeah.
And this is history repeating itself.
Hmm.
Propaganda has been a major tool
Hmm.
to keep people down, and to keep people from helping their fellow citizens.
Yeah,
right? I mean, any genocide we can point to, it's a tool.
that's
But
right.
I always like to remind,
Those people, it's that it's
right? Until it has some other, until it serves again those maybe in more, the popular media, who have a, a larger platform, until it serves their purpose. I mean,
mm,
we can, I can drop back way back to the Chinese, being brought here to, or allowed to come here to build our railroads, and then we put in place legislation to exclude them.
right,
And
right.
when we're done with,
Yeah. We're
there was
we got the work we needed, the harsh, terrible labor we needed. Yeah.
exactly, you Irish Americans, or no, well, the Irish who immigrated, the Italians who immigrated were treated like trash until somebody needed them to be white.
Right. So interesting. I love that book, How the Irish Became White, Noel Ignazi.
Mhm.
I remember that from years ago.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, listen, there's all of those forces, and that's why I'm so,
Mhm.
I don't know, it's been important to be in community with like you and other people who've sort of decided like this is central to who I am and the work
Yes.
and purpose I'm going to do in this life. And
Yes.
I'm not, I mean, you wouldn't think like a dean for art and communication, but it's pretty central to, inclusivity and elevating our humanity is pretty central to the way I see my role. And I just think,
Mhm.
and what you do as a facilitator, as a speaker, as the host of this show, right? And I take heart knowing how many of you really are out there thinking about it in the healthcare context, thinking about it in the educational context, thinking about, I mean, I'm other contexts. Like, so that's kind of what keeps me going, right?
Yes, thank you. And first and foremost, it's a commitment, it's an intention that you have to make as a human being, no
Hmm.
matter what your role is.
That's right.
Yes, because I want the same thing from the Dean of Arts and Communication at the College of New Jersey, that I want from the Uber driver, from everybody, the
Yeah.
crossing guard. I want that for all of us, right? So
Right.
that we
Right.
can coexist, not just tolerate each other. I like to go back to what you said, initially, about loving each other. Yes. And
Yeah.
so, on that note, uh, is there any final advice that you would give to someone looking to improve, on being anti-racist, culturally competent,
Right. Right.
being um, a leader who uh, ex, who expects of themselves to maintain the dignity of all the humans that
Right.
they work with?
Yeah.
Leader in any capacity, volunteer.
Any, right? I mean, it was great. Like our president had a, back to school welcome, and he was talking about leadership. He's like, has nothing to do with your role, really. You're a leader when you decide that you can make a difference, that you can make a change, that you like have like a sense of purpose and you do it 120%, right?
On.
And I liked that. But I was sort of forced into it, right? I got a job that forced me in a way, like there were things in my life that led to it, but it really was this moment in my life where I'm like, wait a second, I am now a white professor of Black studies. I've got to learn, I've got to connect, I've got to know some things and admit what I don't know. Like I got forced to get out of my comfort zone. So if I have any advice for people, if you don't get that, hand of God that puts you out of your comfort zone,
Yes.
can you seek that? Can you get outside of your comfort zone by engaging people who are really different than you, by reading people who are different than you, by listening to their music and really understanding and appreciating their designs, or reading that investigative journalism, or, whatever the expression is, but get out of your own self narrow vision your own narrow self-interest, because it's really the only way I think to really serve the common good, connecting to other people.
Very good. Oh, that was perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect.
Thank you.
Connect to other people for the common good. Pamela, I want to thank you so much for joining me, for sharing so generously with
Thank you.
us. Yes. And sharing your humanity. I think that being in higher ed for so long myself, uh, I just often I hear people outside of higher ed talk about wanting to get into it, or, they hold it. We know that the professoriate holds prestigious,
Yeah.
it holds prestige, excuse me,
Hmm.
in our society, right? In many societies. But at the end of the day, we're all human.
That's right.
And I want us to return back to that. We're no different than the woman in trouble troubling the water,
Right.
right?
Right.
We've just had different trajectories. And we are, if we committed to just love, right? And extend
Great place.
ourselves, yeah, and get out of our comfort zones, how much greater our own lives might be.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well,
I
thank you
really,
so
yeah,
much, really, for inviting me. I always love talking to you, but thank you
yeah,
for inviting me to
yeah.
talk to you and talk to others, right, through this podcast.
Yes. Well, thanks again. And I want to say thank you to everyone who stopped by. And please leave a comment, subscribe, and share this episode. And thank you again for listening to Rooted to Thrive.